is the next story in our stories from Mowgli. It's called Bagheera's Cage. Mowgli had just finished trimming his little toenail with his teeth when Brother Wolf came bounding up to the cave. "Mowgli," he called, "there you are. Mother wants you. She says it's important." Mowgli's stomach sank. 2 days before, he had been racing a leopard cub through the jungle, Billy herring along the forest floor and Mowgli up in the trees. When he had kicked an eagle owl's nest to the ground, Billy had stared at the nest with wide eyes. "Would it be wrong to eat just one egg?" she asked. "Yes." Mowgli nipped her in the neck with his front teeth and glared at her full in the face until she backed away. "I'd get the blame." Then he had gathered up the eggs, placed them back in the nest, and returned it to its place in the tree. None of the eggs were broken, but one of them had cracked, a hairline lightning bolt pointing accusingly up at him. He had twisted the egg around so that the crack wouldn't show, his heart thumping. Some of the nest's twigs stuck out at peculiar angles, and his attempt to neaten them only made it worse. He had hoped very much that the owl wouldn't notice. Clearly, though, she had. Mother Wolf rarely punished her cubs, but when she did, she used every single one of her teeth. Mowgli did not hesitate. He sprinted to the nearest tree, swung himself up into the leafy safety of the canopy, and took off running along the thickest branch. "Mowgli!" howled Father Wolf. "No, wait, it's important," called Brother Wolf. "She says—" But Mowgli was already out of earshot. He did not hear Brother Wolf's final words, did not hear them echo after him. "She says you're in danger." He did not see the fear in Brother Wolf's eyes. Mowgli kept scrambling across the treetops, skinning his elbow on a rough cedar, barely stopping to wipe off the blood until he reached the mango grove. Then he paused, listening for wolves. He hung upside down from his knees and surveyed the world below. The jungle unfurled in every direction, green and brown, intricately entwined. He could see vines and flowers curling around fallen tree trunks and the disappearing tail of an alarmed mongoose. The air smelt of sun on wet earth. If he closed his eyes and blocked his ears and concentrated very hard, he could also smell the feet of the caterpillars, a tangy, acidic smell, and the presence somewhere nearby of lizards. It smelt of things growing and decaying and rising up again. It smelt of home. He swung himself upright, jumped onto a new branch, and reached for a mango. With a sharp crack, the branch snapped suddenly under his feet. He grabbed wildly for a nearby vine, missed, and landed on the moving back of an elephant. It was a shock, to say the least. An elephant's back is stuck full of short bristles, and the skin scraped against Mowgli's legs as he slid down as fast and gently as he could to the ground. Luckily, it was an elephant he knew a little. Rapi was gentle-eyed and soft-eared and would be relatively unlikely to crush him out of annoyance. Mowgli scrambled to his feet. "I do apologize," he said politely, for elephants are the true kings and queens of the jungle, and it does not do to forget it. "Pray forgive me." Rapi laughed down at him. "It serves me right for going anywhere near a man-cub's cave. Like with a coconut tree, you're sure to get hit eventually. Come, sit down here. Tell me about the wolf pack. How many are you now?" Mowgli ran through the names of the newest litter. He could see Rapi memorizing them. It's an elephant's job to know all the life of the jungle. He slowed down his recitation to give her time. "And Bagheera the panther?" said Rapi. "When I last saw him, he said he was teaching you to hunt. How's he?" "What?" Mowgli turned wide eyes on the elephant. "You know Bagheera?" "I knew Bagheera years before you were born," said Rapi. She smiled sternly at him and shook her head. "You are not the oldest nor the wisest creature in the jungle." Mowgli laid one excited, incautious hand on the elephant's trunk. What was he like back then when he was a cub? Like? What was Bagheera like? That is a more complicated question than you know. "Tell me," said Mowgli. And then, as the elephant gave him a look as large as her own body, he added, "If you would be so kind." The elephant's small eyes looked past Mowgli out towards the jungle path and far, far beyond towards the city. "Bagheera was born in a city, in a palace, in a cage," she began. "He wore a red silken collar. He chewed at it until they replaced it, this time with one of thick cowhide, which rubbed away the fur around his neck. The floor of the cage was straw and the bars were iron. The lock, though, was solid silver. All the Maharana's cages had silver locks, and he carried silver keys at his waist in case he wanted to open them. He did not, very wisely, want to open Bagheera's cage. The city palace in Udaipur rose in great carved columns to the sky. Behind the high white walls were gardens, pools of water dotted with lotus flowers, and a series of smaller buildings. 3 of these housed the menagerie. The smallest held just 2 cages. One of them was Bagheera's. The cage was big enough for 3 paces to the wall and 3 paces back. At dawn, before the day grew hot, 2 men came to feed Bagheera with chunks of meat thrown into an iron pan. They would stare at him, but they never dared reach into the enclosure. Bagheera would bare his teeth at them and growl deep in his throat. Even at 2 years old, he was wide-shouldered and fast-clawed. There was a look in his eyes that said he would eat any hand that came near him. It's a fantastic picture of him. The only other cage in the room was set to the left of Bagheera's, too far to touch with his paw. It belonged to his little sister, Gilari. The name meant squirrel, chosen by their mother because she had been so quick-footed and nervy as a cub. Her collar was gold silk. Unlike Bagheera, she had not chewed hers into a pulp, for she feared the leather replacement. She was as slight as Bagheera was broad, and her back was less inky than his. In sunlight you could see the markings of the leopard shining through her fur. Sunlight, though, was a thing they barely knew. The only sun either of them ever saw came filtered through the single high window above their cages. The window did not open. They had never felt the earth under their paws, never seen a tree grow from the ground. They knew only iron and brick and the rattle of keys. Sometimes, while she slept, the men put their hands through the bars and stroked Gilari's back. Bagheera would growl as deep in his throat as he knew how, but it didn't stop them. Bagheera took care to sleep in the exact centre of his cage so they could never touch him. In truth, they wouldn't have dared touch him even in his sleep. They didn't trust him. They were right not to. One day, though, a sudden change came to the menagerie. A gang of high-born boys playing outside in the courtyard sent a ball flying through the high window in the menagerie wall. Shards of glass clattered down into Gilari's cage. Gilari roared, skittering to the side of the cage, crushing her body against the bars in a bid to escape the glass. The menagerie keepers panicked. If she cuts herself, the Maharana will have us both fired. He doesn't want his panthers all cut up. What do we do then? I don't know. I'm not going in there to sweep up the glass. She'll chew my face off. Bagheera, on the other hand, did not panic. He sat, breathing in and out in great gulps. The smell that came through the broken window was unlike anything Bagheera had encountered. He did not hear the keepers roaring, did not hear Gilari snort and huff as she battered at the broken glass in her cage. He could do nothing but sniff at the air, half drunk on the scent of it. The smell was full of wild detail. It smelt of passion fruit vines pushing up from under the dirt, of the passing of elephants with maharanis on their back, of human sweat and monkey sweat and sun. It was the smell of outside, the smell of living things. An animal roar made Bagheera whip round. The men were trying to slide a stick with a hook at the end onto Gilari's collar through the door. They hauled her out of the cage on the end of the stick. Back, she roared at them. Get away from me. Suddenly, Bagheera felt something heavy and metal hook round the edge of his own collar, and he too was hauled against the bars of his cage, half choking and spitting with rage. The door of his world flew open. Gilari was thrust in, and the silver lock clanged shut. The hook was unhitched from Bagheera's throat. The two were together. The menagerie men began sweeping the glass from Gilari's cage. They spoke in their own language. Their faces, wrinkled in a way Bagheera had learned, meant either annoyance or that they were about to expel a loud and unpleasant gust of wind. Bagheera and Gilari stayed at opposite sides of the cage, staring at each other. Never since the day after Gilari was born had they been close enough to touch. Gilari was quivering. The men brushed down the rest of the glass from the high window and went out. The door slammed behind them. There were just the two panthers alone. Gilari launched herself at Bagheera. She tugged at the scruff of his neck and licked his muzzle and the insides of his ears, licked his eyes and paws and tail, chewed lovingly on the tip of his nose. "My brother," she said, "after so long." "Are you hurt? Did the glass cut you?" "Not at all. I thought it was the thing Mamma used to call rain at first," she said. "But then I remember. Mamma said rain changes shape when you touch it, and the glass didn't." "You're lying. You are hurt. There, your paw. It's bleeding." Gilari dismissed it with the butt of her head against her brother's chest. "Why are you wasting time over that? Play with me." And she launched herself at Bagheera, trying to bite his tail. Bagheera was a full year older than Gilari, but he was not too old to play. He crouched and leapt clean over Gilari's back, almost grazing his head against the roof of the cage, landing behind her. He seized the tip of her tail in his jaws. "Ow! Too hard! You don't know how strong you are." Sorry. He had not been within touching distance of another animal for so long. They invented a game in which one leaped over the other's back, somersaulted and came up nose to nose, teeth bared, trying not to laugh. Okay, I'm going to stop there and we'll do some more tomorrow.